Each turn, we check our various cities just to start constructing the same buildings we already built elsewhere, before we then switch over to give orders to our numerous units. After the first few hours of gameplay, a considerable part of the game time in 4X strategy games is usually spent on busy work. Decisions which were interesting at the beginning become much less interesting when you have to repeat them for your 5 other cities. And that's where Myriads Renaissance by Sleeping 8 Studio from France wants to step in, advertising the game as being a light 4X strategy game, shedding some baggage. The game has now been released on the 1st of June, and in this review I will show you what makes the game different from more conventional 4X strategy games, where there are cutbacks, and whether the overall concept of the game actually works out. Besides the light approach, there is certainly also the setting, which sets the game apart from the competition on a visual level. Myriads Renaissance is set in a shattered world where individual boulders float around in the air as inhabitable islands in the sky, and of course the transport of choice in this case is flying sailships. The intro consists of just a few lines of text, which are also telling us about the two rivaling factions. Us on the one side and a realm called Katina on the other. In difference to most other 4X games, which have quite a symmetrical structure, where each faction begins with a similar setup, Myriads Renaissance is clearly asymmetrical. While the player starts out with only one island and one ship, the entire rest of the map is already occupied with the opponent and must be cleared out. The challenge is to be as efficient and quick as possible, as the enemy automatically gets stronger for every 20 turns and is sending an attack fleet at us every 40 turns. So we got to beat them back and in the meantime make as much progress as possible to be able to take on the next wave. And of course get closer to the enemy's main base, as destroying that one is the only winning condition in the game. The world map is rather comparable to a star map, as it is divided into different clusters, each of which has one or more connections to other clusters, quite similar to wormholes or warp gates to other star systems. Each cluster also has a kind of main island that can be colonized with our own settler ship once the enemies have been driven away. Unlike in other 4X games, however, you will not build a full-fledged new city there, but only an outpost, a colony through which you generate additional resources. Whether you turn it into an academy, military, defense, resource or trading colony depends on the circumstances of the cluster and your own assessment of what you need most. The additional floating islands can then be improved to increase the gains, like creating more income on a trading colony for example. Only the settlement you start with is managed directly. To do this, you can switch to a city mode similar to what you know from Civilization or Master of Orion. But you will find a few differences here as well, which are linked to the setting. Our city actually consists of several islands floating in the air, which are gradually chained together. There are mountain, forest and wetland tiles on which you can place different types of buildings. The number of these tiles is also determining how many inhabitants the city can have. For later buildings, these tiles first need to be converted into paved tiles, which can also provide for one more inhabitant. As usual, the number of inhabitants can be increased by surplus food, and the population is then needed as a prerequisite for building the actual buildings. Without these surplus inhabitants, you will not be able to even start constructing additional buildings. Through research, additional buildings can be unlocked and new island pieces can be changed to the city in order to expand it further and further. However, this research is not generated via a university in the city, but for the most part it must be fought for and collected on the world map. There is a research tree that you can work your way through bit by bit, with a few choices as to what you want to prioritize first and whether you want to even skip certain technologies. However, since you follow a fairly rigid quest line that continues to accompany the player even after completing the optional tutorial, it does make sense to check off most of the technologies necessary for these quests. Last but not least, we got the military component, which has also been greatly simplified in Myriads Renaissance. You can decide to place towers on the secondary islands of the colonies and your capital city, which will then automatically fire on all adjacent enemy ships. In addition, you can of course build your own ships, which are then loaded up with soldiers who actually define the attack power. A ship always costs 50 gold per turn, and while higher level soldiers are of course better, they can be disproportionately more expensive. So you have to ask yourself whether these high level troops are necessary yet and actually financially viable. To have the best and strongest ships at the end of the game, it is absolutely indispensable to have built enough trading colonies as well as the factories for the goods to be exported and the docks in the city. And of course, the building for the creation of the soldiers needs to be researched and built as well. One essential element of success in the game is to be able to estimate when to initiate certain steps. There are no random components in battle, and the unit with more attack power will always win. So if the own ship is too weak and you also have no towers or mines to weaken the enemy, then it won't take long until you arrive at the game over screen. But if you just push out everything you can, then you will be bankrupt after very little time. To estimate when it's time to replace the ship or to build a second ship, when to attack and how to expand your capital, or in other words, to get the timing and balance right, is the key to success here. And while that's certainly true for other 4X games as well, it's much more boiled down in Myriads Renaissance. How well does the game do in terms of balance, and how fun is the game with these restrictions? First of all, it is important to note that a full session of Myriads Renaissance is intentionally much shorter than, for example, an average successful game of Civilization. There are no settings for game length or map size, and I would estimate a total playtime for a successful run of about 4 to 8 hours, depending on the level of difficulty and how much time you take for planning. Of course, you will need to try out things first, and need to internalize the mechanics in order to also get the timings right. At the start of the game, the reduced options work very well, and you will face one important decision after the next. But of course it has to be said that this is no different in Civilization as long as you are still only handling very few cities. At around 2/3 of the way through the game, I reached the end of the research tree. Although it works quite well and demands interesting decisions, it seemed to me that you get research points too quickly, and that the tree loses more and more of its relevance. This, however, is also something you see in other 4X games, but to a lesser extent. The reduction of micromanagement worked great for about the first 2/3 of the game. You concentrate on the main island and have to plan with every new inhabitant of your city and every bit of money. As soon as you start maximizing and rebuilding the city, it gets more finicky, and you will also spend more time expanding all the colonies due to new conquests going quicker and quicker. You don't have to do a whole lot in that regard, but in the last third of the game you will have like 3 settler ships on their way and got to spam improvements on plenty of new islands you keep getting. The same applies to the military. Once you are on the move with 3 ships and overrun everything possible, you lose sight of the details. Overall, I'd say that the concept of the game works, and in addition to reducing the total playtime of a single playthrough, you also keep the middle section a bit more simple and tense, with less micromanagement and busy work. Towards the end, however, the advantage dwindles more and more. That said, the game pays for this with having other drawbacks. For the developer, the asymmetrical game concept certainly has the advantage of being able to balance the game more easily, and it also basically eliminates the need for a good AI, which has the potential to make 4X games like Civilization look pretty stupid if the opponents are afraid of water or attack the player with settlers. However, the disadvantage is also pretty obvious here. Due to the very inflexible structure of the game with only one opponent and rather rigid gameplay, the replayability does naturally suffer. Sure, you can try out other tactics and for example rely more on towers than on ships, or research one tech a little earlier than the other, but the picture will never be as different as when you play on one map with the Aztecs and another one with the French. Not by a long shot. After winning Myriads Renaissance for the first time, you also get 2 more game modes, which slightly change the rules, but I don't see that you'd play through the game dozens of times. Of course, you can argue that the game doesn't even want to offer that much, and with its significantly lower price of €20 or US$, this is certainly also reflected in the price. But you need to set some gold standard in terms of overall gameplay, and that is defined by games which do offer a bit more. For this reason, I will give the game an overall rating of 3/4 thumbs up. This makes it a recommendation for those who are looking for something new or an entry game for the genre. However, if you are looking for a replacement for Civilization, you will have to live with some clear drawbacks that the game also cannot completely compensate with its own strengths. But if you are still not sure if this is the right game for you, you can also have a look at the demo, which of course is available on Steam for free. And that's it for Myriads Renaissance. I hope that I've been able to give you a good overview of the game, and if that's the case, then I'd appreciate if you could leave a thumbs up. If you're interested in more reviews and other videos mostly related to indie games, then consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your interest. I say goodbye for now and will fly onward, continuing my journey. Hope to see you again next time. Anchors up and full speed ahead!